Salvate omnes, and welcome to this week's video tutorial. We're going to be taking a look at chapter 9. Our grammar topic in this chapter is demonstratives. And as your book points out, demonstratives point out or emphasize a general point, and it often refers to a person or thing. So we're talking about its noun function, if you will. And then you can see we have a lot of different forms of demonstrative pronouns and adjectives. At first glance, this looks very varied, but you'll soon discover that a lot of these endings match our declension endings, and in the context they're a little bit easier to recognize than perhaps the chart here indicates. But these will need to be learned and memorized, so I recommend making flashcards or using Quizlet or whatnot, and of course just careful practice and study of vocabulary, and the examples will contribute to the learning of these forms. Generally speaking, as your book points out, ille means that or those, and hic means this or these. So that, you're pointing away. Hic, you're pointing toward, if you will. So for example, that man, you're pointing toward that man or to that man. But this man, you're pointing to him, and he is in closer proximity than that man. And your book points this out. So we'll be referring to these, but again, I think the best thing to do is kind of look at them in context. In practice, you'll see that even though we may have varied examples in this chapter, but in terms of when you would see these in Latin, most often it's going to be the nominative form and the accusative form. And again, we'll probably have some other forms in this chapter just because we're practicing the concept. But in practice, it often means like this man is bad or this man is good, or do you see that bad man or do you see that good man? So in practice, it's as a subject or a direct object, nominative and accusative, where you're likely to see these in unadapted Latin. All right, so you want to read through these examples, read through this description rather, and once again, if we were in a classroom, we would do that, but please read through it, and then don't forget to do the self-tutorial exercises in the back of the book. Here's some good examples of kind of the differences between and how they're used. So liber means book. It's where we get words like library. So we have hic liber, but then we say that book, ille liber. So if we go back to our forms here, so hic liber, ille liber, because book is masculine. Now this is an example where we are going to need to know the gender of nouns, which we haven't really talked a whole lot about. So you may have to use Whitaker's words or dictionary. So here you can see liber can mean a lot of things, but in this case it means book. But then down here it says M, which stands for masculine. If it's M, it's feminine, and if it's N, it's neuter. And so book, volume, interbarkatry in this context, book. So knowing the gender of the nouns is going to be helpful, and again, there's no shortcuts for that other than looking up words in a dictionary and learning the gender for nouns. Going back to these contrasting examples, here we have this state, and the reason it's this state is state, if we go back to our example here, this state is feminine. So we're going to need the feminine ending. Well, in this case, I guess they're using, so let me go. So we have hanc civitatem. So you can see right here is our feminine HANC being used as the accusative direct object. And again, if we're not sure, we'll have to look up that, and just to verify. And you can see right here it's being used as the accusative singular feminine. And so the F means feminine, and so we need a feminine form of the noun that we're pointing to or giving emphasis for this demonstrative pronoun. So again, this is gonna, if this is new for you, this can seem very wide open and very wide ranging, but again, you want to learn the examples in the book, so you have a more narrow range of what you need to learn. And in that context, it's much more doable. So please take a look at these other examples. We may refer to them in our examples, but I think these two contrasting pairs give a good example of how these are used. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward to the vocabulary, which you want to learn. Here we have locus loci, which means place or passage, and morbus morbi, disease, sickness. Again, words in parentheses, those are words in English that are derived or come from the Latin word. Studium, studii, hic haec hoc, ille illa illud, iste ista istud, alius alia alud, alter altera alterum, noiter noiter noitrum, nullus nulla nullum, solus sola solum, totus tota totum, ulus ulla ullum, unus una unum, uter uter utrum, enim in. So we have a lot of demonstrative adjective words in this chapter, not a whole lot of nouns or verbs. And then nimis or nimium rather means too much as an adverb. So definitely take a look at those vocabulary words. Don't forget the Whitaker's website has some audio files to help you learn how to hear and pronounce these Latin words. All right, let's go into the lesson proper, if you will, and let's take a look at the sententia antiquae, so the ancient sentences or the ancient sayings, or unos ubi illes nunc videre possum by Terence. I think we mentioned before, is a writer of comedy, and the best way to learn it is to work through it. And so I would get out a pen and paper. Some of you asked during the last test, how do you learn these things? Well, you're just going to have to get out a pencil and paper and learn the vocabulary. So ubi means where. And again, if we're not sure, we have to look it up. So I've said many times, I think this is one of the advantages of Latin, is many of you are in science fields. To do research, you got to slow it down. And so you just have to take your time, look up the words, and put the pieces together. Now here we have illes, and so if we go back to our grammar topic here, you can see that illes is an ille word, that or those, but then it's in the plural, and it's accusative plural feminine. So there's our illes. So we know it's going to be used as a direct object, either probably those, since it's in the, or in the plural form. So let's keep that in mind. And go back to our example here. And then nunc means now, so that's an adverb of time. Videre we had in chapter 1, it means to see. And then possum, we've also had earlier in the book, it means I am able or I can. So this one we put all together is like literally where those now to see I am able. But then we got to put it in the form of a question that makes sense. So where am I now able to see them? So let me write that out, and then I'll try to explain it in greater detail. So where am I now able, or where can I now? Maybe I'll put that a little bit easier. Where can I now see them? So where can I now see them? So where, ubi, can I, or am able, possum, now, nunc, there's our infinitive to see. I guess let me change that to those since it's probably a little bit better. So those. We don't know the context of this. It could mean probably those people, since Terence often wrote dramatic comedies. But if we go back to our definition of ille words, it's either going to mean that or those. So we're going to put it in the plural. So we're going to say those. But again, what makes this a little bit vague perhaps is we don't have a noun because only the context would fill in what the those is referring to. All right, so moving ahead here. So that one is a little bit wonky in terms of, it seems to be missing something, but that's what it means. All right, so here we have duo hic illam virginem in matrimonium ducet. Matrimonium is where we get the word marriage, matrimony. But then we have hic, and then illam virginem in matrimonium ducet. Now this one, a couple things in this one. So the hic, haec, hoc. So we go back to our, a little bit awkward to go back and forth, but that's what we need to do. So the hic is the nominative subject used as a demonstrative pronoun. So as I said earlier, the first two examples are nice because it illustrates that, as I said, that most of the time these demonstratives are used either as a nominative or accusative. And so we've seen that with the first two examples. So hic is masculine, so it's probably this man or this person. Since it's singular, we use this. If it were plural, we'd use these. So we'll just say this for hic, but then we got to go back and look at the rest of the example. And again, you can use Whitaker's words if that helps give you a little more confidence. So hic, well, it doesn't really tell us, it doesn't really distinguish. But so again, it doesn't really tell us if it's singular or plural because it gives us hic, haec, hoc. And so, but it is singular as we saw in the chart just a moment ago. So hic illam, but then we have am and then em, which tells us this is the direct object. So we go to am, but then em. So that is the accusative direct object because accusative is the direct object in Latin. But then we have a preposition in, and then into matrimony is how we're going to translate it, because matrimonium is a second declension noun. How do we know that? Because it's a neuter noun ending in um, and then the genitive singular always tells us the declension to which a noun belongs, in this case the letter I. So if we look here, neuter, there is e, so matrimonium, matrimonii. So there's our endings of u and I. So Latin is all about, that's why Latin is an inflected language, all about the endings. So we go back to the entire sentence is, but then we have the verb down here. Now this one we got to be careful, probably got to look it up here. So as you'll see, this one is actually in the future tense because of the letter E, because it is a third conjugation verb. Remember the first two conjugations are bo, be, boo. This was in an earlier chapter, but the third conjugation doesn't have bo, be, boo for the future tense. Rather, it uses the letter E, and hence we have ET here. So we're going to translate that as will lead. So we put all together is that this, again, this man, but so this man, because it's masculine, will lead that girl into matrimony. In other words, that they're getting married. So let me write that down here. So this man, and again, the Latin doesn't have man, but that's the implication. So this man will lead that girl into matrimony. Now, I tend to keep my readings and translations somewhat literal. If you look up the word for Virganem, you might see maiden, or I mean, let's look up to see what Whitaker says here. So, but you just have to choose one. But I think girl is the most sensible. Girl of marriageable age. That sounds really weird. Young woman, maiden. So remember, one of the things the Whitakers, or not Whitakers, what the Wheelock's Latin tries to do is to indicate that this was a language used to over 2,000 years ago. And so a lot of times the social context, the language, the culture was very different. And so translation is not a one-to-one simple operation. Requires a little bit of imagination. Here's an example where maybe none of these words are that fitting in the 21st century, but that's what it says right here. All right, so number 3, Huio concilio palmam do. And we only have 4 words here, but this one can be a little bit tricky because of the hui concilio. So let's get a grasp on the huic for a second here, and we go back to our chart here. So you can see it is dative singular. So dative means, remember, dative means to or for whom something is done. So it's either going to mean to this or to this man. So we're going to use this because it's singular. So just remember it means to this. And then we go back to our example here. Is concilio means plan, also in the dative, and then palmam is the accusative singular, and it means the palm branch of victory, and then do. So let me write this out. So I give the palm branch of victory to this plan. So let me write this down. So I give the palm branch of victory to this plan. Now, what does that even mean? Well, I give it my approval or a thumbs up. But, Rome was a very symbolic society, and, certainly in everyday language, we tend to shorten our symbols, but I think we all sort of see this as giving the sign of approval. Now, in terms of the Latin, a couple things here. Let's start with the direct object palmam. Well, that one's fairly straightforward because that is accusative singular am, because that's the direct object. So I'm giving the palm branch of victory. So I'm giving this. So since this is the object of the giving, we call that accusative direct object ending in am. But then we have concilio, which is dative because you give something to someone or something. In this case, you're giving approval to the plan, hence we have concilio. But again, if you're not sure about this, which many of you may not be because you're still learning Latin, and we have to look it up, and it's not by the plan because the context doesn't support that, but you can sort of see that concilio can mean a lot of things, but this is a word you've had earlier in the book. And so, and then don't forget there is a dictionary in the back of your book which restricts the vocabulary more exclusively for the examples in the book. Because you can see here, there's a lot of different options for this. As you know, English vocabulary is a lot larger than Latin vocabulary. All right, so I give, or I am giving, the palm branch of victory to this plan. So literally, to this plan, palm branch of victory I give. So do is do dare dedi datum. This was one of the first verbs you learned in chapter 1. All right, quatuor virtutem enum ilios viri amemus. So this is Cicero. So we love the virtue of that man. So let me write this out here, and then I'll try to explain it. For we love the, I could type here, virtue of that man. So let's take a look at this. So einem means for, and it's often in the second position. So again, it sounds a little bit overly formal in English, but you definitely want to put it in your translation. So for we love, because we is mus, ame, where we get words like amicable, means love, amor. So this is a verb you've had before. So we put it together, for we love. And then we love what? We love the virtue. So notice virtue ends in em because virtue is third declension. And sure enough, third declension accusative singular ends in em, and that tells us it is the direct object. So for we love the virtue. And then we have the grammar in this chapter, ilios viri. So let's take a look at ilios. So we're just going to have to go back and take a look at this. Well, ilios is singular genitive. In fact, all three of them are ilios, ilios, ilios. So genitive, as you know, means of, of. So we just say of that, because it's singular. So of that. But then we have viri, because man is second declension, and second declension genitive singular is the letter I. So ilios viri, of that man. So we need both those words in the genitive. So we go back and look at the original example again in Latin, and you can see, for we love the virtue of that man. All right, so that one's fairly straightforward, but you definitely need to know your endings and grammar. Okay, quinque. Solus hunc juvare potes. So solus means alone. Hunc means, in this case, him, as we'll see. Juvare is the infinitive to help. And then potes, which is the second person singular irregular form of kin, or to be able. So remember, if a verb ends in s, it is second person singular. So you are able, or you can, but then we have solo. So you alone are able to help him. So let me write that down and then I will explain it. You alone are able. So Latin just has two words for that. Latin has solus potes. So solus potes, you alone are able to help juvare, and then him. Oops, I put it in the Latin there. Is our demonstrative adjective. In this case, it functions as an adjective. So you alone are able to help him. So you, s, alone, solos, are able, pote, like potential, to help, juvare, and then hunc, him, because hunc is, as we said earlier, just to look one more time, that hunc is going to be, so I guess in this case it means like this. I could change it to this man. Let me change it so it matches the grammar a little bit, but it is referring to him. So hunc, as you can see, is singular this, but it's the accusative direct object. So I will change this to be a little bit more exact, I guess. You alone are able to help him. You alone are able to help this man. But again, the original Latin doesn't have man, so you could say him as your translation. In fact, that sounds, that works. But if we want to be more, literal with the grammar, we can say this man, because hunc is masculine. All right, moving on here. So again, this, once again, when I first saw this several years ago, it seemed a little bit, not complex, but it looked like a lot of different endings. But in practice, over time, you'll get more and more comfortable with it. And it just comes down to looking at the chart, learning the chart, and then, let's be honest, the examples are not real long. I mean, some of these are just a few words. This one was only 4 words. This was 5 words. This is 5. So 4 words. So these are not long examples, and they just have to be memorized. Now, with that said, we have a longer example right here, but we only have 9 total, so this is not a lot to learn. So, Puena istios unios hunc morbum civitatis relevabit, sed periculum semper remanibit. So again, with anytime you're doing something longer, especially if you're a beginner, you got to slow it down and just take your time. I mean, even if you're not a beginner, you just want to slow it down and take your time. So, Puena means penalty or punishment. So this is a word that we've had before. Again, if we're not sure because we have forgotten, which is fair enough, we just look it up. And you can see it means penalty or punishment. Again, the challenge is only the context will tell you its case or function or meaning. So the punishment of that one man, I'll try to explain once I go through this and write it down in English. I'll go back and explain it. But this is istios unios hunc. So of that one, of this one man, I guess, in this case. Let's go back and take a look at some of these endings here. So hunc we just said is this. But then we have of that. So this one's a little bit trickier because it's using 2 different forms, ille and hic in this case. So of that, so there's the ilios. But then the unios also is in the, is that right here? No, let's see. I thought they had a chart for this one. I think they're explaining it in this context. They only give you the one example, but unios also is genitive. But again, if we're not sure, we just got to look it up. And you can see it's genitive. And so this one's a little bit trickier just because it mixes the different kinds of demonstrative pronouns and adjectives. So we go back to the example here. Is the penalty of this one man. So let me go ahead and write this down as a kind of a marker here. So, or the punishment. So the punishment of this one man. But then we have morbum civitatis relevabit. So this one's a little bit trickier. So anytime you have a longer sentence, see if you have any conjunctions or punctuation. Here we have a conjunction but. So we have a new clause, in other words. So let's see if we can get this part first. And then once we get that, then we can add this part. So we have morbum and then civitatis. Now, morbum is one of your vocabulary words in this chapter. You can see morbus morbi. So morbidity, morbid, disease. So disease or sickness. But if we go to, so we know it's second declension because it's us e. But then if we look at our us e, if it's morbum, it's the direct object. So we're going to translate this as the disease or sickness as the accusative direct object. But then we go back to the example. Again, this one is getting a little bit long-winded. It's just, so I apologize, but it's a little bit longer. And we go back to the example. Relevabit, it means to relieve or to diminish, but it has bo bibi bibi boo, which is future tense. So it means will diminish. So let me go ahead and put that right there. But then diminish what? Well, diminish the disease of the state. So let me go ahead and write that down. So the punishment of this one man will diminish the disease of the state. So let's take a look at, so the punishment, pena, of that one man, so when the context tells us it's man, will diminish the disease of the state. Now again, this is Cicero, and Cicero is probably talking about Catiline, so they don't really tell you that, but that is the context, that Catiline was a conspirator that Cicero advocated against in the Roman Senate, and he was sent into exile. But of course, there were other, anytime you have a conspiracy, there's always more than one person involved, especially if it gets to the highest levels of government, in this case, which it did. And so Cicero's point is that, yeah, we may be able to get rid of this one person, but there's always others trying to bring down the state, in this case, the authority of the Senate, which Rome, as you know, was founded as a republic in 509 BC. But as Rome grew beyond the institutional framework of a republic, because Rome expanded, Rome became an empire, and that's sort of the context that Cicero is arguing against. Is he's arguing for the continuing role of the Senate, but as history showed, and Caesar would be the person to study this in greater detail, Rome was no longer a republic but an empire. But the danger will always remain. So let me write that down here. But the danger will always remain. So this last part is a little bit easier. So if we look at this last clause here, said we've had before in chapter 1. Periculum we've had before. It's where we get words like perish. So that's a neuter noun. But the danger will always, because bo be was future, and of course this is where we get the word remain. And then semper means always, just as an adverb. So once you look up the vocab, this one is fairly straightforward. The tricky part is the istios unius hunc, which means of that one. Think of like a unicorn, one of a kind, of that one. And then the hunc tells us it is, once again, just looking at our endings here, of this. Did I even get that right? I got to double check it here. So of this, that tells us it's accusative in, of this one man. All right, so that one's a slightly tricky one just because it's a little bit longer. Okay, moving on to the next one here, which is septem. And he enum de exitio huios civitatis et totus orbos terrarum cogitant. Again, another longer one, so we got to take our time with this one. Now the he is, that's going to be hic haec hoc. But then we look here, this is plural, so it means these. So he, like think syllabus, syllabi, since it's plural, we say these. In fact, let's go ahead and write that down just to help us here. So that is the these. But then, going back here to the example, enemy we said means for. So we're going to change the for these. So this might be one way to do it, is just take your time, one word at a time. And for these. But then we have de, which means about. So that is a preposition which means about. We've had this before. Again, if you're not sure, you have to look it up in a dictionary, Whitaker's Words. But then it's always followed by the ablative. So if we look here, preposition plus the ablative. So it means about or concerning, according to, so about is probably the most general translation of it. Unless it's a place, then be like, for example, from Rome would be Rome. But here it's probably about, since we're thinking about something. So if we go back to our example, is And then exitio, we had on the test, it means like literally the extinction or death. Exitio, let's look this one up. This one actually could mean a couple of things, but yeah, so ruin or destruction. So you can choose, mischief probably is not the right word. So either destruction or ruin might work best in this context. So for these about the destruction, for these about, the destruction. Now you can already see that in English we would need the subject and verb here, or the verb, because we already have these. But Latin, as you know, tends to put the verb at the end, and so our verb is all the way at the end over here. And so this is our cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, by Descartes, used long before him. Is cogitant, it means are thinking, because they, for these, are thinking. So again, if we're not sure about this, we look it up. And you can see it's present, active, indicative, third person, plural. So it means they, agreeing with he. So are thinking, reflecting on, pondering, that seems too philosophical, too Greek. So Romans were a little bit more practical than the Greeks. So for these are thinking. So that's he enim cogitant. So he, these, enim, for, cogitant, are thinking. For these are thinking about the destruction of huius civitatis, of this state. So huius, let's hold on to this right here. So hic, hoc, huius. So we go back to our example here. Huius means this. And then don't forget these examples right here. Do they have the huius? Yeah. No, they don't have it on this one. So at any rate, they don't have all the examples, but they have here huius means genitive, which means of. And then this is how we translate it because it's singular. And then civitatis is genitive. We had that earlier. And again, if we're not sure, we'll look it up. It's where we get the word state. So for these are thinking about the destruction of this state. And again, the context is Rome was always sort of at war and civil war during the 1st century BC. So for these are always thinking about the destruction of this state, and literally totius orbis terrarum literally means of the total orb of the lands. This is an idiomatic way of saying the entire world, and of the entire world. In fact, let's just put that down. So this phrase right here probably just orbis terrarum means the world, of the entire world, totios, total, of the total world. So for these are thinking about the destruction of the state and the total world. Yeah, a little footnote. My wife and I, we saw the movie Napoleon the other day, and I'm not an expert on Napoleon, but certainly Napoleon was interesting because, like Caesar and even like Rome in one sense, this is sort of the modus vivendi of Napoleon, always thinking about France, its destruction by revolution, its reconstruction, but also in a world totalizing way. And that's what made Napoleon somewhat interesting, but also problematic in the modern world, is he was seemingly embodied the ethos of Roman Imperium, but some almost two millennia rather later. Anyways, interesting movie. Check it out. It's definitely worth seeing. Okay, moving on here to so that one, a little bit tricky, but I think if we just look up our vocab for these, cogitant are thinking about the destruction of the state and of the entire world. So these, sometimes the genitive probably just has to be memorized. So just make a note card. Totius orbis terraro means of the entire world. Okay, octo. Es nullus locus utri homini in haec terra. So this is Marshall. He with Juvenal tends to be a master of satire. A little bit of description about him down here. So literally, est means is, but it can also mean there is. So there is no place on this earth. So here we just had earth down here, or in this world. And then utri homini. The utri is one of our vocabulary words, I believe. And it means either or which of the two. So you're going to see we have to either choose it for either or which of the two. But remember, these function as adjective words, and so we got to look up the endings here. Utri, so this one is a new word for us, I believe. And it can mean either locative, dative, or ablative. So it's either going to mean to either or by either. Is we're going to have to keep that in mind to see which one works here. So there is no place for either of these men on or in this world. So let me write this down here. There is no place, I type here, for either of these men in this world. So this one's a little bit tricky just because the Latin has a lot fewer words. So let me try to explain this in greater detail. So est means is, but can also mean there is, because otherwise, we don't have a proper subject, if you will. And then nullus locus, that's pretty straightforward. This means no place. Locus is one of the vocabulary words. And then in haec terra, this actually is in the ablative. Ablative often functions as place. So if we go back to, here is our ablative singular right here. 1 second here. All right, sorry, I got to let the dog out there. He's not feeling well today. Okay, so there is our ablative, and ablative often functions as where. So in haec terra means in this world. So in haec terra, in this world. Tricky part on this one is this tricky expression here. Looking at it one more time, is namely utri homini. But then we just have to recognize that utri is for either of these men. So Latin has two words for, in English we have for either of these men, and English has 5 words. And that's sort of the essence of Latin. Again, think of Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, in the year of our Lord. That's 6 words in English, only 2 in Latin. So this one is tricky, just because it is in the dative here. So there is no place in this world for either of these men. Novem, number 9, non solum eventus hoc docet iste es magitus stultorum, Sed etiam ratio, by Livy, the famous Roman historian. And eventos means outcome. So if it's in italics, that's so the event. So literally, not alone this outcome will teach that he is a master of stupidity, but even reason. So one of the things in this one is we've got to make sure we get our verb tense correctly. And you can see, so in this case, it's present active indicative, so it means teaches or shows. But then what teaches or shows? Well, the outcome. So this outcome, so not only this outcome teaches, let me write that down first. So not only this outcome teaches, so non solum eventus, not only this, hoc, not only this outcome teaches, he is a master of, literally of stupid people, but we'll say he is a master of stupidity. He is a master of stupidity. So, he is a master of stupidity, literally of stupidities. So if you wanted to put it in the plural, we could, just so the grammar fits stupidities. Which kind of makes sense. If you're a master of stupidity, it means it's more than one wayward thought or action. So orum is second declension genitive plural, so of stupidities. You've had this word before with the example in the test of Ecclesiastes. But also reason. But also reason. In other words, reason also teaches that he is a master of stupidities. So there is the word for reason in Latin, but also reason. All right, let's take a look at the longer passage for today. It's actually by Seneca. Again, it's not the best organization on this Kindle version, but Seneca, 4 BC, 65 AD, Stoic philosopher, tutor to the young Nero, the author of numerous essays, epistles, tragedies. He urges his readers to pursue the life of the mind. Accused of involvement in a conspiracy against Nero, like Socrates, his hero before him, he was forced by the emperor to commit suicide. So here is our passage. And let us read. Legiamus. Si vi studere philosophiae animoque, hoc studium non potes valere sine frugalitate, haec frugatis es paupertes voluntaria. Tole igitoris des excusationes, non dum satis pecuniae habio, si quando illud satis habibo, tum me totum philosophiae dabo. Incipe nunc philosophiae non pecuniae studere. All right, so let's take a look at this here. Again, it's about dedicating yourself to the life of the mind. And, it must be difficult to live a life of compensations and not realizations. Philosophically, life isn't easy, but oftentimes we don't fully commit ourselves to our own human existence, as philosophers would want to suggest. And we, as Freud pointed out, life is a compromise, and yet sometimes by compromising we fail to realize. At any rate, let's take a look at this. So, si vi studere philosophiae animoque. So, if you want to study, but also means to devote yourself. So to study So, for example, you are learning Latin, you're not studying Latin. Although Latin has more of a study aspect than a modern language. So if this were French 101 or Spanish 101, you would definitely just be learning it. Why? Because Latin does require thinking. That's the difference between Latin and a modern language. It takes many, many years, probably in at least the third or fourth year, if not more, of a modern language before you start studying it. So if you're taking German, before you start studying Nietzsche, you first have to learn German. Well, the nice thing about Latin, you're already reading Seneca, so you're learning Latin, but you're studying at the same time, and that's where Latin is unique compared to a modern language. Because studying does require some devotion. Studying isn't for a job; it's for your learning and your knowledge and understanding. So we can say study here if you want, but it means to devote. So if you want to devote yourself, or if you want to study philosophy and the mind, so here we probably have to say yourself. So if you want to devote yourself to philosophy and the life of the mind, literally to the mind. So let's see, what is this titled? This is entitled, doesn't really have a name, so let's call it Seneca. All right, let's get this organized here. Okay, so si vis, if you want, is si vis. So we had this word before vis, it's irregular. That's where we get words like volition. To devote yourself, so that's studere. We're putting it, Latin doesn't have yourself, but I think that's what we would need in English to make it sensible. To philosophy and the life of the mind. I'm a philosopher, so that's why this language is easy for me. That's why I don't need to go back and look at it. But let's go back and look. So if you want to devote yourself to philosophy and the life of the mind. Now, studere always requires the dative. So if we look this up here, it doesn't say that right here, but it does require the dative. And so how do we know that? Because take a look at philosophy is AE, and then animo ends in O. So we know that it is dative. By the way, we know it's dative and not ablative. You're thinking, well, how do we know it's not ablative? Well, because philosophy is in the dative. So, and then the context tells you you're devoting something to someone or something. So Latin often doesn't have the preposition. So if you want to devote yourself to philosophy and the life of the mind, this study or this devotion. So this is one of our vocabulary words. So we can go back here and, oh, I just missed it there. So studio means eagerness, zeal, pursuit, or study. And here they have to or for, which tells us we need the dative here. So let's just stick with study. I think it makes the most sense for what we're doing here. So if you want to study, if you want this study, in other words, this kind of study, is not able to flourish, literally to be well, without frugality. So you could, a couple different translations, but so this study, but literally this kind of study, is not able to flourish without frugality. So let's take a look at the original Latin here. So hoc studium, so that goes back to our demonstrative masculine pronoun. So we go back here to the beginning here. Oops, one more. So hoc, because studium is neuter. So this study, or this pursuit, in fact, maybe pursuit might work nice. Let's change that just because that's one of our options too. So this pursuit, this works a little bit better because otherwise we'd have to say maybe this course of study, which is too modern in its disciplinary language. So this pursuit is not able to flourish without frugality. So Benjamin Franklin said something similar. Frugality is one of his virtues, and of course Benjamin Franklin studied philosophy and a lot of other things, and it's hard to render those things to Caesars which are Caesars and to gods which are gods. It's hard to do both. Some people do it, but it's not easy. And of course, a lot of people that make a lot of money, in one sense, let's be honest, they don't know a lot about philosophy. At the same time, many philosophers, seemingly don't know how to make a lot of money, and so as human beings, we seem somewhat bifurcated or duplicitous in our aims. I think in some sense, certainly this is how the founding fathers of our country understood it, is we can do both. We can be practical, but also mindful and civically responsible. But of course, a lot of people, as history shows, go to one extreme or the other. At any rate, so this study or this zeal, this pursuit is not able to be well, potest valere, without frugality. So sine is always followed by the ablative. So third declension ablative singular is the letter E. So sine, and there's our E right there for sine frugalitate. This frugality. So frugality is feminine. In fact, they have the word over here. In fact, they have actually give us a lot of good vocab over here. So this frugality, and so we're going to use the feminine form of hik, hike, hok. So hik, hike, hok, huyos, 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 huy, huy, huy. All right, so we got to learn these things. So hike. So this frugality. This frugality is voluntary poverty. So poverty, voluntary. This frugality is voluntary poverty. Think of somebody who joins a monastery. You're basically renouncing the world. This is complex, but there is some truth in sublimation, requires renunciation. To be an artist or a thinker or a musician, something that is beyond biological necessity and social progress does require some kind of willful renunciation of what we call progress and reality. And I think that is expressed in this language here. Tole means take away. So this is the imperative, going back to an earlier chapter. Think of like a toll bridge raising up, but literally take away. So again, we'll just follow the vocab here. Take away, therefore, those excuses. So take away, igitor. Tole. Therefore, igitor, and then those excuses. So if we go back to those excuses, notice the istes, that's going to be plural. So if we go back to our, let's see, this one, right here. So istes, actually they don't give us that right here, but we have to follow the rules here. And where is it at right here? So istes, which is as right here. But again, if we're not sure, and there is a fuller synopsis of these in the back of your book as well, but you can see that it is accusative plural. And then, as your book points out, ista is often pejorative or negative and some kind of negative valuation of whatever it is being discussed. Okay, so take away therefore those excuses. And what are the excuses? Not yet enough of money I have. I don't have enough money yet. So the excuses are I don't yet, so nondum, have enough money. Literally enough of money in Latin, but I think in English we would say I don't have enough money. So nondum means not yet. So not yet enough of money I have. I don't have enough of money. I don't have enough money yet. And then what's the other excuse? According to Seneca, si quando illud satis habebo. So quando means when, si means if. So literally if when, but when I have enough money is how we would translate that. So let me write this down. What is the punctuation on this? They're using a period. Okay. So when I have enough money. So this one's a little bit tricky because Latin has the si quando, so you might just want to make a flashcard and say that means when. And then it has the illud, means referring back to money. So I guess you could translate this as that when I have enough of that, but I'm going to say money because it is referring back to money. But literally, when I have enough, when I have enough of that, literally, if when that enough I will have. So it's just kind of a little bit tricky to translate this one, but the context is definitely referring back to money. Then I will give myself totally to philosophy, or I will give all of myself me totum. Then I will give myself to philosophy. Again, the Latin literally has I will give my total self, because it has totum me, but then means tum. So then dabo means I will give, because bo bi 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 bu bu, and then me totally, and then you give something to someone, in this case to philosophy, because once again it's in the dative singular, because dative is to or for whom something is done, in this case to philosophiae, to philosophy. Okay, and then let me fix the punctuation here. I'll go back and look at that grammar note in a second here to see what the deal with that is, but right now moving forward. And then the last one is incipe, where we get words like incipient, inception. It's also in the imperative. So begin now to study philosophy, or to devote yourself to study philosophy, not money. So begin now to study philosophy, not money. All right, so begin now to study, studere, philosophy, because remember, study requires the dative, so that's why we have dative endings here, and then not money. Which is true in one sense. You can't study, I mean, you can study economics, you can't study business. Why? Because money and business is something you do. It's not something that you can study in any deep way. So study, as Seneca uses it, is consistent with a research model of a university education where it takes years and years and years to refine one's methods and learn. Only then can one study something. It takes years and years of learning before one can study. And if you think about it, if you know what you're doing, just a little bit of common sense and hard work can often contribute to a successful business, not years and years of study. Now, if you're studying economics and markets, that's a little bit different. But But still, I think that's true in terms of just how language works, is we study economics, we don't study business. We learn business. Studying requires a different way of thinking and doing. All right, so takeaway there for those excuses, that's fine. I'm not going to change that there. So, all right, so that one, that is Seneca. They have some other, they give us any other vocab here. Begin, therefore. What in Seneca's opinion, this might be on your test, what in Seneca's opinion often stands in the way of living philosophically, a philosophically sound lifestyle? What solution does he propose? What special force does Istes have? We said often it's negative. And there is a famous bust of a famous Roman philosopher. All right, so that is it for this chapter. As always, please let me know if you have any questions. And we are coming to the end, and I will note in an email about if you need to meet with me about the final. It might be a good idea to come by one of my German classes, and I will even propose a review the Friday before the final, which, if you look at the exam schedule, ours is on a Saturday evening. So, all right. Well, happy learning,